All right, our presenter this month is Nicholas Borden. Nicholas is the Director of Environmental Development at Hedrick Brothers, and he's responsible for managing its environmental subsidiaries, including Reef Arches. He's responsible for strategic planning, business development, grant writing, intellectual property protection, strategic partnerships, and software development. He does a lot. He is also co-inventor of Reef Arches with his contribution of integrating mangrove restoration, go MRC, go Reef Arches, with their wave attenuation, creating a nature-based solution and an effective shoreline restoration method. He holds 2 degrees from Babson College in supply chain management and commercial real estate and was a software developer for 7 years. And with that, I will hand it over to Nick.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Honor, and great to meet everybody as well. And really excited just to show you what we've been up to and how everything kind of culminated into nature-based solution that is Reef Arches. So with that in mind, I think I should share the screen. Is that all right with you, Honor?
Yep, perfect.
Right. Well, let's click here. I say software developer, and then working these things could also be just as tricky. All right, can you see my screen all right?
I can see your screen. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. So nice to meet you, everybody. I'm one of the co-founders of Reef Arches, and we're a nature-based solution. We're actually based out of West Palm Beach, Florida, and we focus on a couple items. We focus on marine enhancement, like you see behind MRC. We focus on oyster growth, coral restoration, even mangrove restoration. We really want to focus on living shorelines and, showing people there's more than one way to provide great solutions to slow down waves while also helping the environment. With that in mind, we're actually a subsidiary of Hedrick Brothers Construction. We're about 200 employees. We're 45 years old. We're pretty, seasoned general contractor. And so for some of the students in the room, a general contractor is just somebody who gets a piece of paper to perform a service. And then we go out and we find, the bricklayers, the plumbers to then perform that work. So in that case, we have a lot of experience. And I thought, I think this would be a good idea to do an environmental solution. So myself and my co-founder, Parker Hedrick, made what you see today. So what is this wonky looking feature? So this is called the Reef Arch. It is a half a ton piece where it is 6 feet long and 4 feet wide and 2.5 feet tall. Really what we're trying to do, big picture, is we want to slow down waves. That's it. If you slow down waves, you protect the mangroves. You also stop from erosion from hitting the shoreline. And you also create this nice lagoon effect behind it, behind the reef arches. So that's really a big deal because when you have things like seawalls, there's not a lot of protection. You're also creating more waves. So we like to calm the water. So in the picture here, you could see it's from our manufacturing site over in Fort Pierce, Florida. And you could see underneath the arch that there's light going through it. That's a big deal, right? We want to create a very sustainable design that allows water to move through, light to move through. That's really how you create habitat. You want to create these dynamic environments. And with a cool looking design, you make it fun, visually appealing, right? Because we're all looking at the environment. Everybody cares about it. We all want clean water. We all want to keep our home safe from erosion. So that's why we wanted to incorporate that in the design. So our very exciting project with none other than Marine Resources Council. This was the project at start. And you could see the sediment pin behind the Ted Moorhead Lagoon house. And we have this giant red line to show the palm tree. So all the trees are falling down in front of our, archaeological site. We need to slow down the water. So once all the reef arches were placed, you can now see a couple things happen. One, behind the reef arches, the water's calm. That's great. Second, the sand is much wider. Now, this isn't a high tide or low tide. It is actually a microtidal zone. So we're actually accreting new sand. And now looking at our palm tree, and it's got more sand. Fantastic. Here it is in action to kind of explain the physics behind it. You can see in the intercoastal, all that wave action is coming in, and our arches are doing a great job in tripping the wave, right? That's the magic behind the system. If you let water move through, it will be able to throw that sand to the other side and also slow down the waves, right? You want to keep water moving. So now you can see Jessica Klein, Parker Hedrick, and myself standing on the new sand that's growing, which is super cool. Right? We're building land, we're building beaches, we're creating protections that otherwise wouldn't have been there. And then afterwards, 18 days, you can see the sand is now touching the arch. Huge, big deal, because now that's 12 feet out from the shore. So that's a lot of sand that we were able to capture. And then about a month and a half later, you could see there's no scouring. And for those of you who, again, for the students in the room, the scouring is basically if you're standing on the beach, with your family and friends, and you put your toes right to the wave, you'll feel the sand go out from underneath your toes, right? And then you'll fall forward. So the fancy term is called scouring. What we're showing here is that the sand is staying. So, right, your feet wouldn't experience the sand to escape. That's a big deal. And that's why we want to keep this living shoreline and keep this archaeological site protected. So now, again, this was the start, and this was the finish as of July 26th. So you could say, oh my gosh, that's a lot of land, a lot of beach, it's a lot of new habitat for the birds, for the horseshoe crabs, for your seagrasses, for your oysters. That's a big deal. So, of course, we move forward into that nature-based solution that we loved and we talked about. We wanted to really focus on resilient and design. So because MRC has the mangrove restoration group, mangrove restoration component, they had a wonderful volunteer event. And you could see here, and for those of you who are more familiar with erosion and wave dynamics, this is on the southern point of view, meaning that there wasn't any erosion down the line. So that's nice. So the arches actually created a bulbing effect from the shore rather than creating erosion. Anyways, so a lovely volunteer event that MRC hosted, and please get more involved with MRC. It's awesome, and especially those announcements that Honor mentioned. Super exciting. You could do things like this. You can help participate, plant some amazing mangroves to now restore our environment. Looks great. And since this picture was taken, we've had a couple of storm events. We had Tropical Storm Debbie and Hurricane Milton, and the reef arches were still in place. So it's doing a great job. It collected enough sand to basically get thrown, right, and taken away from the storm. But that's good because it's not taking the sand away from our archaeological site. Right? And that's what we're trying to do, protect the history. So just as an overview, you could use reef arches as a living shoreline and let those mangroves grow through and create that really cool nursery. You could use it as a breakwater, meaning it's going to take the punch from the wave and we calm the water behind it. And we also got some other fun players. We got Ferguson Waterworks, who wants to distribute our product, which is great. So now we can help not only our shoreline in Florida, we can also focus on other states as well. And because that's a big, journey, a big undertaking, we have to get more material. So we're partnering with a material supplier as well. And that said, just taking a step back, really nature-based solutions are needed for all sorts of reasons, from hurricanes, from boat wake, even from rain, you could get erosion. So right now in Florida alone, there's over 8,000 miles of shoreline. That's a big deal. And there's a lot of protection that a lot of our communities need, especially after the hurricanes on the West Coast. We did some testing. It's always good to have your proper due diligence. So you can see here in this video, we actually have our wave tanks measuring it. And a wave tank is really a glorified bathtub. For pretty much, it's a good way to think about it. You just splash the water on one end, wave comes, we get to see how the the water behind the arch behave, and then we measure it. That's basically it. And then, of course, the last part is for deployment. Took it on the truck, lifted it from the truck. It wheels, right? And we roll it. So we didn't use a barge for this project for a couple of reasons, but that said, we found a way to get it done. By giving it wheels, we're able to create a whole new method of installation. So that's great. So we using, basic physics, we're able to lift the arch, slide it, and connect it together. So no gas, no electricity, probably the most low impact way to install a piece like this that we've invented. Yeah, we got some really great pictures, got some great publicity for the product. So it really just goes to show people like inventions, people like innovations, especially those that work, that help their community and help their environment. So if you have any questions, I have some other pictures here, my appendix of some aerial shots, our oysters, but we could talk about that as well for the Q&A. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Nick. All right, so if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And we'll start. We've got one.
Okay.
Are the main applications for the arches to be partially submerged, or do they have applications for fully submerged systems? Great question.
Yeah, great question. And I know we have a wide audience, like you mentioned earlier on. We have, remind me, we have students and we have, what's the range so I know how to answer it and address everybody.
Third grade to older adults. So give us a nice overview, I would say.
Okay. So for the first question, the main application is at its core to slow down waves. So you can have the reef arches partially submerged, like you see at Palm Bay there at MRC. That's a very valid solution. And we could also stack the units vertically, right? So we could now get some height. And in doing so, you could address overtopping, right? So if your wave energy goes a little bit higher than 2.5 feet, it would then strike the top version. We can make a fully submerged system. That's where the reef comes in. So we're actually partnered with the world's largest coral nursery. That's because barrier reefs slow down about 97% of wave energy. So by actually running a reef arch underneath the water completely submerged, you're able to trip the wave early on before it actually gets to shore. And then we have these modular inserts like this, if you could see my screen. We have these inserts where you grow corals on them, and then they get planted onto the actual arch behind me in my background. So having structure like that also slows down the wave energy. So long-winded way of saying, yes, it could work both fully submerged and partially submerged.
Awesome. Okay. We've got a lot of questions, so get ready.
Sure.
Second question, what happens if the waves do go over the arches?
Yeah, so great question, Stephanie. I see here you're in fourth grade, so awesome. Loved your interest. Absolutely keep focusing on conservation. So if a wave goes over the arches, what we're basically doing is we're trying to slow down the wave. And the way you do that is by putting an object in front of it, you're tripping it, kind of like, if a waiter were to fall down at a restaurant, right? Where if they fall and they're carrying that tray of food, the waiter will fall, but the food will fly in front. And then we kind of want to capture the food, and that's our sand. So if the waves do go over the arches, that's actually a good thing. We want to have the waiter fall far away from us so you don't get the food spilled on you. So that's a good thing. If it's completely underwater and the waves are still going over it, that's where we can actually stack the arches a little bit taller, and we're able to think about that before we install it. But great question, Stephanie.
Awesome. Okay. What are the arches made of?
Sure. So, all right, I see it from Beth. Yes, so Beth, we can use a couple of options. We use a combination of CSA concrete and masonry sand. So that's how you get a pH neutral mixed design. When you have pH neutral, it allows those oysters to grow and it's more friendly. If we're looking at strictly breakwater, this is just to take the punch from the water, then we would use Portland. If it's to make a really nice coral reef, we have actually specific mixed designs. So it really depends on the application. So, but those are a couple of mixed designs we use.
Could this product be used as an artificial reef in the ocean?
Yes. So thanks, Larry. And so I think I touched on it a brief about, let me go into it. Yes, you can use this as an artificial reef. And we really wanted to focus on that because when you create complex designs, you get what's called a snapper grouper complex. So you need a healthy ecosystem. You need your predators, you need your prey, you need adequate light to move through, a lot of surface area, and also you would need to get, well, eventually your corals to come through. The way the Archer's performing is incredibly important, and that's why we partnered with Plant a Million Corals. They're down in Summerlin Key. The second part for artificial reef installation is how do you get it there? And how do you install these easily and safely? So if you could see my camera here, Larry, we could actually stack the arches one on top of the other like Dixie cups. So we could put it on a barge and safely lift it and drop it. So we do have a system of doing that, and we're looking for more opportunities to actually deploy it as an artificial reef.
Great.
So let me know if that answered your question. I'm more than happy to expand on it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to combine two questions.
Okay.
So, how much engineering and site prep work, and then I would also add how much permitting time is required prior to installation of the arches?
Okay. All right. So this sounds more like an adult. This is great. So, how much engineering and site prep work is required prior to installing the arches? Okay, great question, Carolyn. So, couple things. One, we would do a seagrass survey to make sure there's no right seagrass is in play. Then we'll look at the wave height, how much fetch would be needed or expected in that area, and the water depth. It's pretty quick. Um, Everything can be measured pretty easily. We'll also look at the sand, right? Just to see is it muddy or is it coarse sand. So once we get that determined, then it's pretty easy to just go in and install it. That's a big deal because if you were to use something like rubble or like those riprap, you actually have a lot more processes and steps. Like sometimes you'll see fill, then a fabric, then you have to take the big rocks, then you have to stage it. Then once you have your big rocks on the bottom, then you have your middle layer of rocks and then your top layer. Your total volume of material is significantly more rather than just drag and drop. So there's not really a lot of site work. It's just checking to make sure there's no seagrass in place. If there is seagrass in place, we would actually still be less expensive because your riprap would take a larger footprint and thus a larger mitigation cost. Whereas our arch, we're actually seeing evidence of the seagrass growing underneath it, but that's a different story. Our mitigation cost would be lower in that scenario because it's less footprint for the same result. And what was the next question?
So could you talk a little bit about what permits you need and how long those permits would take, if you know?
That was a fun one. Yeah, so in this scenario, I don't know who asked that question, just so I could address them right.
It was anonymous.
Oh, okay, sure. So two different permits were required for this project, and this was done through Army Corps of Engineers and DEP. So FDEP actually does have a permit exemption, and that exemption is as follows. If the submerged land is owned by a municipality and they're looking for bank stabilization less than 500 feet, it is exempt. So that was nice. Then the second one was through Army Corps. We had to show that the actual arch itself didn't have, I think there was a restriction on how much concrete you could have in a pure cubic foot, but we were way under just because of the nature of the grid design. I mean, Otto, do you remember how fast we got we got the Army Corps permit pretty quickly. That was
Yeah,
lucky.
we have a
We
connection for that, so we got lucky. I
yeah, we
think it was
definitely
less than a week.
yeah. There was less than a week as a new permit, which is unheard of. So I can't guarantee that will happen in the future again. But in those two situations, that's how we would do a permit. As a bank stabilization, if you're looking to do or use reef arches for oyster restoration, that's fine. It would be a low profile oyster restoration permit. And we have a 50-pound unit for that. If you want to use it as a living shoreline, I believe there's already one through Army Corps for that. I think so. There's a nationwide permit that follows. And then for artificial reefs, we filed one down in the Keys already. So that it has to go through the Florida Keys Marine Sanctuary. So I want to better answer your question, depending on the application, but that's how the process has been so far.
Awesome. I think that the general Army Corps permits, I think that they typically tell you it'll be within 90 days. So it shouldn't be too preventative time wise.
Correct.
Awesome. All right, let's see. Would it be an option to move the arches further out from the beach once the beach is restored to continue to build the beach or expand the living shoreline?
I like you, Tim. We were thinking about that. So in theory, by way of physics, probably. By way of what's allowable by permits, probably not. Because there will become a certain distance where the beach could extend out and become a navigational hazard. Once any object is beyond 10 feet from shore, then it's considered, an artificial reef or breakwater, different permits. Then you have to go through find. In this case, especially with MRC, we wouldn't move the arches at all. We want to actually grow the mangroves, have the mangroves completely cover the arch, and then the arches are disappear. So we're trying to really create an Iron Man suit for the shoreline, and because you're trying to give the mangroves an ability to take root. If we remove the arches, that's the only stabilization we have for the beach, and we would lose all the protections, and there wouldn't be anything to slow down the wave energy. So could you move it? Yes. Would it help at this stage? Not really. That's why we wanted to kind of leave those units, and it's all locked together. So you can see in our background, the arches are connected, and now you have a 15,000-pound assembly. So it would be hard to move as well, which is good, especially with Hurricane Milton. You don't want it to move. So I hope to answer your question, Jim.
What type of cost factor is involved in purchase and installation?
What type of cost factor, or just the cost in general?
I think, yeah. So I know it's probably very dependent on size of the shoreline, but we have a question on maybe if you could give a rough estimate of the cost for purchase and then installation.
Yeah, sure. So exactly. So depending on the length of the shoreline and the depth of water will impact it, right? Because the arches are 2.5 feet tall. So those are two things to consider. We have two arches available. We have a 50-pound unit, which is $300. The 50-pound unit is used for low profile oyster restoration. That's great for volunteers, for kids, Boy Scouts or Girl Scout events to actually go and place it. So that's been a really good application. And we have a couple of projects that we literally just sell that right off the shelf. If you give us a call or just email us, we could just ship those to you. Okay. Now, what if it is a 1,200-pound unit, a more substantial project requiring installation? So give or take, each arch is around $2,500. And that is because we use a pretty premium material mix to let the oysters grow, right? We use CSA concrete. If you ask us to say, hey guys, Reef Arches, I need you to just give me 100 feet of shoreline. I'm not interested in habitat creation. I just needed to take the punch. Then we would use a mixed design that's already been pre-approved, like Portland, and we're able to actually slow down the wave energy. But because that cost of material is less, we can also charge less for you. So then it comes to roughly $400. You know, obviously the prices change, but around $400 per truckload to actually get it sent to you. It will be sent from anywhere from Fort Pierce in the state. If it is somewhere further, then it's a case by case in that scenario. So I hope to answer that question.
Awesome. Okay. How do you determine the distance between reef arches to allow flow through of the water body?
Distance as in the gap in between, or distance from, I'll just answer, I guess I'll just answer both.
I think it's probably regarding the gaps in between, is what I would think.
Okay. So great observation for the person who submitted the question. That is actually a legal requirement for all installations by the Florida Wildlife, Florida FWC. So I think it's Florida Wildlife Commission. So FWC requires a 5 foot to 10 foot gap between each structure. The reason is for manatee entrapment. So if you have a manatee go behind any object and the wave were to recede, the manatee needs to have an outlet to go through. In this particular case, the project was already designed. So we just have to put it at, I think in this case was 10 feet. It depends. It could be 5 or 10. But that's just a requirement by FWC that we have to follow.
All right. Okay, I'm going to combine two questions again. What is the structural lifetime in a marine environment? And then related to that, what happens if it breaks?
Got it. So lifespan and durability, we're aiming for 50 to 75 years. And one of the ways concrete breaks in general is two things. One, you use reinforcement like rebar. So for the students in the room, rebar is a piece of metal made of iron, and when it rusts and turns that orange color, it expands. But when it expands inside concrete, it will break and crack. So for everyone else, we don't use rebar, we use basalt as our reinforcement, and we're also having some other materials as well to reinforce that. First thing. Second is when we actually attach the arches together, they actually have a 1 inch spacer in the middle. Concrete also loses its durability when it's rubbing. So we want to remove the friction by adding that spacer in between. So those are two ways we've addressed it just on the design and the placement. The third is also the type of material we use. So that's pretty important depending on this application. Also, permeability of concrete, letting the water sit and soak through completely is another aspect. And what if the reef arch were to break? So we have a warranty on the arches if during transportation, we find like, oh my gosh, something for some reason cracked upon delivery, we replace that. That's no problem. And if there's something going on with the arch and we look at it and we say, that shouldn't have broken there, we'll replace it. It's not an issue. But if it's something like a boat were to strike it out of nowhere, all right, we can't foresee that. But what we can do is during the replacement process, because it was attached via the fiberglass plate in the middle, it's easy for us to actually go in, right, within this. If you can see my screen, it's easy for us to go in, remove the middle component, right, have that gap, and then place a new one. So hope that answered that question.
Awesome. Can you please tell us about when you were a kid and how you became an inventor?
Is this from Stephanie?
This is from Stephanie.
Fantastic. Sure. So Stephanie, this is So when I was a kid, I loved inventing. I actually had a book where I would draw all my inventions and I'll think, is this a good idea? And once I thought it was a good idea, I actually would try to share it with other people because you'll come to find that it's not just the idea that's important, it's also who's able to make it come true, right? You could have the best shoes, at a race, right? The best product, but it's also a matter of how well you run in the race. So that also matters. You still got to, do your trainings and make sure you're able to get there. Um, so, and then from that position, how I became an inventor through this was we had to design the product, go to a patent attorney. They're able to help us with the filing. And what that is, Stephanie, is you basically show some pictures of your product and you say, this is my thing. This is my really cool invention. And this is what it does. And you have a list of those actions. Say you know, my pen here is one of a kind and it has the ability to, click here and twist here. You list that all together. You submit it to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, also called the USPTO. And eventually they just give you a piece of paper, like a report card at the end, and they say, hey, you got straight A's. This is awesome. Now you're an inventor. And it's a status shown to the government and to your friends that's saying you're now the inventor of this product. And when people read it, then they know why is it important? Why is it uh, relevant to the business you're in, right? So those are some things. So it's just a little filing, and it'll take a while, take like 18 months, but keep on thinking, make your ideas, share it with others. People want to help you, and you absolutely can become an inventor.
Awesome. Is the 4x6 the largest module that you have, or do you have a larger one?
Yeah, it's a great question. The 4 foot by 6 foot is the largest one we have currently. We actually are working on a 3.5 ton unit as well because there's some projects that we've been approached on that the wave energy is so big that we actually would need to make a larger unit. So that way we have a 3.5 ton unit times however many are attached. So we are working on that, and it's usually on a per project basis that we'll talk with a client on it.
Great. Are you currently working internationally, or if you're not yet, would you consider working in the Caribbean, specifically Belize?
So that's a great question. And Stephanie, there's another patent you can get. Patents also are U.S. patents and international patents. So for Carolyn, your question, we do have an international patent, and the reason is we are looking to expand into the Caribbean. If you know anybody, especially in Belize, that would be interested in this, absolutely, we would actually talk with them. We would either ship the product or ship the mold, and we would make it on site. We would use the local materials to produce it, procure it, and we have our method to install it. So absolutely, that's something we want to do, and we're looking to scale very rapidly in that.
Can you tell us about some of the use cases you have so far? What are you most excited about in the way that reef arches are being used?
What's the most exciting use case for reef arches? So personally, the most exciting is coral reefs. I love living shorelines because living shorelines and coral reefs go hand in hand, right? Because all your little fish need to grow in the mangroves. They grow up, and then once they leave, they want to go into that reef system and create that life cycle. As an industry, it's pretty easy or straightforward to grow your mangroves. It's easy to get an arch out into the shoreline, and it's easy to grow corals. I say easy, but it's not. It's pretty complicated. But there's a process. The problem is that there's no process to have an efficient, scalable, artificial reef deployment method. So what we're doing is we're creating what's called an instant barrier reef. meaning people could grow corals on a product like our insert or their own, but they could then deploy it on here. The problem is that in our oceans, it's a parking lot. There is no structure. So you could make a billion corals, but if you don't have a place to put it, what good does that do? And even I can make 1,000 miles of living shorelines. If the fish have no homes to go to afterwards, how does that help? So I'm very excited with the artificial reef section because now you created more habitat, more tourism, more education, and artificial reefs slow down, or reefs, excuse me, slow down 97% of wave energy. So I'm really excited about that. What's extremely difficult is permitting to incorporate such a process. The math shows the habitat will exist. So that's something we've already addressed the living shoreline stage. Now we're moving into coral reefs, and now we could create an entire system from the lifespan of the fish to maturity. So that's what I'm beyond excited. So we've been able to grow leather corals and stony corals with the reef arches. That's a big deal. And because we could stack the arches, you could use different types of corals, right? Because corals grow in different, how would you call it, different lights, different temperatures. They're very picky. Corals are like princesses and princes. They want it just right. So we have to make that Goldilocks type of environment within the arch. So you asked me a very exciting question. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Is this product appropriate for the Indian River Lagoon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Indian River Lagoon, you need to have more oysters, right, to clean up the water. You can never have too much clean water. So that's one. Two, there's a lot of erosion that comes on the shorelines of our lagoon and our intercoastals. It's a lot of vulnerable shoreline, and there's not an effective way to stabilize it. There's a lot of spoil islands or conservation islands in the intercoastal. So it's also needed to keep our islands safe. The other case is living shorelines do provide a nature-based solution for everyone's home on the intercoastal, on the Indian River Lagoon. So it's definitely relevant. And the fourth point is the inserts that we make as well could even grow right on the seawalls. So now individuals like you who live on the Indian River Lagoon or others can actually get involved in cleaning up, our waterway and able to get our community safer, from these environmental damages that are happening. So absolutely.
All right. How many arches, dream scenario, how many arches do you think will be used in the next couple of years? And what are some of the places in Florida that they've been used already?
Yeah, so dream scenario would be our expectation. I mean, we're looking to, we have a batch plant. We have well over 2 dozen molds. We have a national distributor, and we're working with some of the largest mining companies available in the state. So we're going to be pushing several thousand units of product because when you get an order of 1,000 feet, or several miles of coastline, we're able to address it. So we're no longer looking at or measuring it in units, we're measuring in miles. So we'd like to do, 100 miles, at least 500 miles, and then grow up from there.
Excellent. And then where have they been used in Florida already?
So we have a couple locations. We have obviously the Melbourne, right there at Marine Resources Council. We then have 3 additional locations: Boynton Beach, Sebastian Inlet District, and Town of Marineland. These are 3 locations that we're now closing on, and we're producing units as we speak. We also have around 20 other projects, mostly in the East Coast section, but we've also been getting attention in Georgia and Louisiana. We've just actually, I got a call this morning for the Panhandle. So even though we're getting a lot of projects, it moves immediately into the stage of design and engineering. So once that's in, then we can just print it, how do you call it? Print it from our manufacturing process, and we could just ship it. So,
Great.
so right now, yeah.
Okay, I think this is our last question. Do you provide engineering documentation or calculations for given site conditions?
I provide engineering documentation for calculations for given site conditions. Okay, so great question, Sarah. So in a scenario where we've had this already happen, a client approaches me and they say, Nick, I have a project for you. I look at it and I could actually send that to one of our distributor clients. So our relationship with Ferguson also includes design and engineering. So depending on the project, I'll just ask them to say, hey, this is a project in mind for living shoreline, a breakwater, what have you. They provide a documentation. Great. Option one. Option two, you bring an engineer or a firm that you already like and work with. I then can send you the wave dynamic data, right? It's a just a deck for those also in the group. I have a report that shows how we slow down the wave energy empirically. So I would take that deck and I would give it to your engineer. Then we would give our suggestion saying what would be the correct design orientation depending on your need, if it's just slowing down water or if it's for habitat creation. So we can provide that information in conjunction with your engineer, or we could bring in our own.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. I think that's all of our questions. Thank you so much, Nick. Awesome job. I did put Nick's email in the chat, so if anyone has other questions, as long as he's okay with it, go ahead and email them to him. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, you could email me there at my Hedrick Brothers email, or you could message me at my Reef Arches email as well. Whichever work, I'll answer both.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.